The sun had barely risen, and the city was waking up slowly. Cars rushed past with honking horns, and people hurried to their jobs with coffee cups in their hands. Among them was a young man walking quickly, his bag bouncing against his shoulder as he tried not to be late for work. His mind was full of tasks, deadlines, and the pressure of another long day. He wanted nothing more than to reach the office on time. But as he walked, something unusual caught his eye. On the side of the road, near a bench, a stranger sat slumped forward. His clothes were torn and dirty, his shoes had holes, and his hair looked as though it hadn't been combed in weeks. The man's face carried the heavy look of exhaustion. He was shivering in the cold morning air, clutching his stomach as if it was empty. The young man slowed down for a moment. His heart pulling him in two directions, he knew that stopping would mean being late. His boss was strict, and one more late arrival could put him in trouble. Yet he couldn't just ignore what he had seen. The stranger looked invisible to everyone else. People kept walking by without even turning their heads. Some even crossed to the other side of the street, pretending not to notice. For a moment, the young man considered doing the same. Maybe it wasn't his problem. Maybe someone else would stop. Maybe the man had made mistakes in life and this was the result. But then, another thought struck him hard. What if it was him sitting there? What if fate had pushed him into that place? Would anyone stop for him? Would anyone care? He slowed his steps even more, his heart beating faster now. The stranger lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met for a brief second. In that single moment, the young man saw pain, hunger, and loneliness in those tired eyes. It wasn't just the look of a poor man. It was the look of someone who had been forgotten, someone who no longer expected kindness from anyone. The young man stopped walking completely. People behind him looked annoyed as they brushed past, muttering under their breath, but he didn't care. Something inside him refused to move forward without doing something. He opened his bag quickly, checking if he had anything that could help. Inside, he found the simple lunch he had packed for himself, a sandwich and a small bottle of water. He pulled them out, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice he was making. He knew this meant he would go hungry until lunchtime, but he also knew this man in front of him might not have eaten in days. He bent down slowly, crouching to the stranger's level, and held out the sandwich and the water. The stranger looked up, his lips trembling, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, he didn't move, as if he couldn't believe someone was offering him food. The young man smiled gently, encouraging him. "Here, take it," he said softly. With shaky hands, the stranger reached forward, taking the sandwich carefully, as though it was the most precious thing in the world. His eyes filled with tears, he whispered something almost too quiet to hear. "Thank you." The young man nodded, but inside his heart swelled with emotion. Around them, a few people had stopped to watch. Some looked surprised. Others seemed almost uncomfortable. They couldn't believe that someone had actually stopped to show kindness when everyone else had walked past. As the stranger slowly opened the sandwich and took his first bite, relief spread across his face, his shoulders relaxed, and he let out a small sigh. The young man felt his own throat tighten with emotion. It was such a simple thing, yet it meant so much. He knew he had to leave soon, but he couldn't walk away immediately. He stood there for a few moments, making sure the stranger was okay. Deep inside, he realized this was not just a random meeting. This was something that would stay with him forever. And so, in that quiet corner of the city, while cars rushed by and people hurried to their jobs, one young man made a choice that shocked everyone around. He had chosen kindness over convenience, humanity over haste, and in doing so, he had lit a spark that others could not ignore. The morning encounter, which could have been just another ordinary moment, turned into the beginning of a story that would inspire many. The stranger, once invisible, had been seen, and the young man, once just another face in the crowd, had become someone unforgettable. Asterisk. The stranger was still chewing slowly on the sandwich, every bite looking like both a relief and a struggle. Crumbs fell on his lap, and his hands trembled as he held the food. The young man stood nearby, uncertain of what to do next. He could feel the eyes of strangers watching. Some had even stopped in their tracks, whispering to one another as though something extraordinary had just happened before them. It was strange, wasn't it? a simple act of giving away a sandwich and a bottle of water, yet it felt so unusual that people treated it as a rare sight. Some of them frowned, maybe thinking the young man was foolish. Others smiled faintly, touched by what they saw, but no one else had dared to stop. The young man glanced at his watch, his mind reminding him of the office, of the strict boss who would check his arrival time. But his heart wasn't ready to leave yet. He crouched down once more, speaking gently to the stranger. "Are you all right, sir?" His voice calm and warm. The stranger looked up, his mouth full, and nodded with watery eyes. That tiny nod carried a weight, a silent story of gratitude, as if no one had treated him like this in a long time. The young man felt his chest tighten. The decision he had made just moments ago was already growing into something bigger than he expected. Behind them, a woman whispered to her friend, "Why is he wasting his time? He'll get nothing back." Another person muttered, "Maybe the homeless man doesn't deserve it. Who knows what he did to end up here?" These cold remarks reached the young man's ears, but instead of shaking him, they only made his resolve stronger. He ignored the murmurs and placed the bottle of water carefully next to the stranger. "Drink slowly. It'll help," he said softly. The stranger obeyed, lifting the bottle with shaky hands. The water touched his lips, and his entire body relaxed as though life had returned to him with every sip. The people around could no longer deny the effect. Some tilted their heads, their expressions softening. A few even looked guilty for not stopping earlier. It was as though the young man's kindness was a mirror, showing them the humanity they had forgotten. Minutes passed, and the young man noticed the stranger had already finished the sandwich, crumbs scattered across his shirt. He smiled faintly, but the sight also hurt him. He realized how hungry this man must have been, hunger that gnawed not only at his body but at his dignity too. Without thinking twice, the young man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small note of money. It wasn't much, barely enough for a meal at a cheap cafe, but it was what he could afford at the moment. He handed it to the stranger. The stranger's eyes widened in disbelief, his hands shaking as he refused at first. No, you've already given me enough," he whispered. But the young man pressed the money gently into his palm. "It's okay. Please take it, you need it more than I do." The act drew gasps from a few bystanders. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered louder, "He's crazy helping like this." But one older man in the crowd smiled and said under his breath, "The world needs more like him." The stranger held the money as though it was gold, his lips trembling as he tried to form words. Finally, he whispered, "Nobody has treated me this way for years." His voice cracked with emotion, tears spilling from his tired eyes. The young man felt his own throat tighten. He didn't know this stranger's story yet, but he could feel the weight of it. He could sense a lifetime of pain and rejection hidden behind those eyes. For the people watching, it was a scene they wouldn't forget. A simple morning in the city had turned into something unusual, something that made them question their own choices. Why had they all walked past? Why had they all ignored someone so clearly in need? The young man stood up slowly, ready to leave, but before turning away, he placed a hand gently on the stranger's shoulder. "You're not invisible," he said softly. The stranger's lips parted in shock, as if no one had reminded him of his worth in a very long time. The words spread quietly among the bystanders, repeated in whispers. "You're not invisible." Some lowered their eyes, ashamed, while others looked moved, and though they didn't say it out loud, many of them knew they had just witnessed something powerful. As the young man finally walked away, late for work, the crowd slowly dispersed, but their minds carried the image of what they had seen. Some still muttered in judgment, but many others walked with heavy thoughts, wondering if they too should have stopped. The stranger, now sitting straighter than before, clutched the money in one hand and the empty bottle in the other. For the first time in years, he felt seen. He felt human. And all because one young man had dared to do what others would not. And though the act was small, the ripples of that kindness had already begun to spread, through whispers, through eyes that had witnessed it, through hearts that would remember it. It was no longer just a sandwich or a bottle of water. It was a reminder, a challenge, a shock To everyone around, that kindness still existed in a world where people often chose to look away. The stranger sat quietly, the empty sandwich wrapper on his lap, the bottle of water resting by his side. His hands still clutched the small note of money the young man had given him. For a long moment he just stared at it, as though he wasn't sure it was real, as though any second someone might snatch it away. The crowd that had formed earlier had mostly gone. The city noise returned. Cars sped by. Footsteps rushed along the pavement, yet the memory of that kindness lingered in the air like a soft echo. The young man had walked away, but the stranger's heart was still trembling from what had just happened. He lowered his head, his chest heavy with emotions, and for the first time in years someone had not just noticed him, but had treated him like a human being. The stranger whispered to himself. Why did he stop? Why me? The tears he had been holding back finally rolled down his cheeks, wetting his dry skin. As the minutes passed, another thought began to take shape. Maybe the young man had seen more than just hunger. Maybe he had seen the story that lived behind the tired eyes, a story no one else cared to hear. And so the stranger began to speak softly. Even though the young man was no longer there, maybe he hoped anyone might listen. Maybe he just needed to let it out. His voice cracked as he whispered, I wasn't always like this. Years ago he had a family, a wife who smiled at him every morning, and 2 children who ran into his arms when he came home from work. He had a steady job, a small house, nothing fancy but enough to make life comfortable. He used to laugh often. He used to feel alive, but life had a cruel way of testing him. The factory he worked in shut down without warning. One day he was a worker with a paycheck. The next, he was just another man without income. Bills piled up, debts grew heavier, and the stress began to eat away at his family. His wife tried to support him at first, but as months passed and he still couldn't find work, arguments grew louder, patience thinner. One day she packed her bags and left, taking the children with her. He was left alone with nothing but unpaid rent and broken dreams. He tried to fight. He tried to survive, but every door he knocked on was closed. Every employer looked at his ragged clothes and tired face and turned him away. Slowly, the house slipped away, then the small belongings, until all he had left was the street. People stopped seeing him as a man. They saw only the dirt on his clothes, the smell of hunger on his body. Some mocked him. Others looked through him as if he didn't exist. After a while, he stopped expecting kindness. He stopped expecting to be treated as anything more than a shadow. And then came this morning when a young man carrying his own worries stopped. When everyone else passed by, he had given him food, water, and money. But more than that, he had given him something he thought was gone forever: dignity. As he sat there remembering his past and feeling the weight of the present, a cafe worker stepped outside holding a small paper cup of tea. She placed it near him without saying a word, her eyes soft but shy. He looked up in surprise. Perhaps she too had been touched by what she had witnessed earlier. Perhaps the ripple had already begun. He took the tea carefully, nodding in thanks. "Bless you," he whispered. She smiled faintly and returned inside. The warmth of the cup in his hands brought tears again, not because of the tea itself, but because people were beginning to see him again. The stranger leaned back against the bench, whispering softly as though speaking to the young man who had already gone. "You don't know what you've done for me. You reminded me that I'm still human." His voice shook with emotion. At that very moment, 2 children walked past with their mother. The little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed at him. "Mama, why is that man crying?" The mother bent down and whispered something, but the boy's eyes didn't leave the stranger. The innocence in his stare was not judgmental. It was curious. It was pure. The stranger gave him a small nod and a weak smile. The boy smiled back, and in that simple exchange he felt a tiny spark of hope. The day went on, but inside the stranger's heart, something had shifted. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was remembering the man he used to be, remembering that maybe he could be more again. All because one young man had stopped when no one else dared to. That night, as he lay under the open sky, the city lights glowing faintly above, he clutched the small note of money close to his chest, not for its value, but for what it represented. It was proof that kindness still existed, proof that he was still worthy of it, and though the young man may have forgotten the moment by tomorrow, to the stranger it was unforgettable. It was the beginning of a new story, the moment when his voice, long buried under silence and shame, began to rise again. This was no longer just about food or water. It was about being seen, about being reminded that his story mattered, and tomorrow maybe he would find the courage to tell that story to someone who would truly listen. The morning moved on, but the memory of what had happened outside that small cafe refused to fade. People came and went, some still whispering about the young man who had stopped for a homeless stranger, others checking their phones where the moment had already begun. To spread, someone had filmed it, the sandwich, the water, the quiet words, and uploaded it online. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting or crying on camera. But there was something powerful in the silence, in the simple kindness shown, without asking for attention. The video had no title except for one line: "This young man did what we all ignored." By noon, it had been shared hundreds of times, viewed by thousands. People started commenting, some expressing shame, others calling the young man a hero. Strangers from different cities wrote, "This made me cry," or "We need more people like him." Meanwhile, back at the cafe, the stranger still sat on the bench, now sipping the tea that had been given to him earlier. His hands were steadier, his eyes still tired but no longer empty. Every now and then, someone walked by and offered him a smile, a nod, or even a kind word. An older woman approached quietly, holding a small bag. "I don't have much," she said gently, "but I packed an extra lunch today." She handed him the bag with both hands, as though offering something sacred. The stranger blinked, unsure how to respond. He took the bag with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, again and again. A man in a suit passed by, stopped for a moment, and placed a few coins near him without saying anything. Not out of pity, but out of quiet respect. He nodded once and walked away. More people noticed the act and followed, not in a performative way, but with real emotion in their eyes. Inside the cafe, a young waitress watched from the window. Her eyes still red from earlier. She had seen the whole thing. The way the young man knelt, the way the stranger looked up. She couldn't forget it. "He didn't even wait to be thanked," she whispered to her coworker. "He just gave and left." Her coworker shrugged. "Some people don't need to be seen. They just do the right thing because it's the right thing." That line stuck in her mind, and she wrote it down later that day when sharing the video online. She captioned it, "Some people don't need to be seen. They just change the world." Quietly, the ripple was spreading, but not just online, in real life too. Later that afternoon, a local news crew came to the cafe. They had heard about the video and wanted to know more. They interviewed the staff, the customers, even passers-by who had witnessed it. One old man told them, "I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I've seen that homeless man there every week. Not once have I seen anyone stop." He paused, his voice shaking. "Until today," another woman admitted on camera. "I feel ashamed. I've seen him there before too, but I always looked away." She wiped her eyes. "That young man reminded us we can do better." People started leaving small bags of food near the bench. Others came just to speak to the stranger, to hear his story, to listen, really listen. For the first time, and though the stranger wasn't used to so much attention, he tried his best to be polite. He answered gently. He thanked them sincerely. But deep down, he wondered if it would last. He was still afraid this kindness might vanish as quickly as it appeared. He wasn't used to being noticed, to being treated as more than a burden on the street. But for now, he allowed himself to hope. Just a little. In the evening, the cafe owner came out with a folded blanket and handed it to the stranger. "You can sleep here tonight in the back area," she offered quietly. "It's warmer than the streets." The man stared at her, lost for words. His lips quivered as he tried to speak, but only tears came. Across the city, people continued to talk, not just about the video, but about themselves. Parents showed it to their children. Teachers brought it up in class. Community groups started small conversations. What would you have done? Do we see the people around us? The young man, meanwhile, remained unknown to most. He hadn't posted the video, hadn't come back, and hadn't expected anything in return. He had simply gone to work, perhaps unaware of the wave he had started. But those who saw the video remembered his face, his simple clothes, his calm eyes. They remembered the way he knelt down, not above the stranger, but at eye level. They remembered the way he saw someone others had chosen not to see. And that moment, quiet, small, human, shocked everyone around, not because it was loud, but because it was rare. It reminded them of something they had forgotten, that kindness doesn't need applause to be powerful, it just needs to be real. That night, the stranger lay under the blanket behind the cafe, his belly not empty, his heart not so heavy, and, though he had lost many things in life, today he had been given something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The sun rose quietly the next morning, casting soft golden light on the quiet alley behind the cafe. The stranger slowly opened his eyes, wrapped in the warm blanket given to him the night before. For a few seconds he forgot where he was, his body still stiff from too many nights on cold concrete. But something was different this time. He wasn't cold, he wasn't hungry, and for the first time in years he wasn't alone. He sat up slowly, listening to the soft hum of morning life outside, the clink of coffee cups, the low chatter of early customers, and the smell, warm, fresh, inviting, of bread being baked inside the cafe. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him, like a memory of a home long lost. Then the door opened, and the young waitress stepped out with a shy smile, holding a plate with 2 pieces of toast, some eggs, and a cup of tea. She walked over carefully and knelt down beside him. "Good morning," she said. "You must be hungry." The stranger blinked, unsure how to respond. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "No one's done this for me in so long." She smiled and placed the food next to him. "Then just eat," she said softly. "You don't need to say anything." Inside the cafe, the young man, the same one who had shared his sandwich the day before, had returned not to seek attention, not to finish the story, but to check if the stranger was okay. He had thought about him all night, unable to shake the image from his mind. The eyes full of pain, the trembling hands. When he entered the cafe, the waitress's face lit up in surprise. "You came back," she said. "He's out back." The young man nodded, pushing open the back door slowly. The moment the stranger saw him, his face changed completely. His eyes widened, then softened, then filled with tears. He tried to stand, but the young man stopped him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "No need," he said with a smile. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." The stranger looked at him like someone would look at a miracle. "I don't know why you helped me," he said, voice cracking. "But you saved me." The young man sat down beside him on the ground, not caring about his clothes or the dirt. "You don't need saving," he said calmly. "You just needed someone to see you." They sat there for a moment in silence. Just 2 people, 2 souls from different worlds, but on the same ground, sharing the same air. Then the young man pulled out something from his bag, a folded paper, slightly wrinkled. "I have a friend," he explained. "He runs a shelter just a few blocks from here. They give food, clean clothes, even help people find work sometimes." He paused, offering the paper. "I told him about you," he said. "He'll make space if you show up today." The stranger stared at the paper as if it was a key to another life. "You've already done so much," he whispered. "I can't ask for more." "You didn't ask," the young man replied with a gentle smile. "And I'm not doing this to make myself feel better. I'm doing it because you matter." Those words hit harder than anything the stranger had felt in years, not because they were loud, but because they were real. Behind them, the cafe owner stepped out, arms crossed, but a warm smile on her face. "He can stay here for a few hours if he wants," she said, "until he's ready to go to the shelter, maybe even clean up inside." The young man looked over at her, grateful. "Thank you," he said. The stranger, still sitting, felt something bloom in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Possibility. Later that day, the stranger did go to the shelter, not out of desperation, but out of hope. The workers welcomed him with quiet kindness, gave him a hot shower, clean clothes, and a bed. That night, he looked at himself in the mirror for the first time in years and didn't look away. He saw wrinkles, scars, tired eyes. But he also saw a man still standing, still breathing, still worthy. Meanwhile, the video of the original act had gone viral. Local news had picked it up, and people across the country were talking, debating, sharing their thoughts. Some said it was just a moment. Others said it was proof that the world still had good in it. But for the young man, none of that mattered. He didn't care about the views or the likes. He didn't even know the video had gone viral. He was just happy the stranger had eaten, had slept, had smiled. He walked home that evening without fanfare, without attention, but with a heart full of quiet peace. He had not expected anything in return. He hadn't changed the world, but he had changed one man's world. And in a world that often moved too fast to care, that was more than enough. Asterisk. The video spread faster than anyone expected. By the second morning, it wasn't just being shared by neighbors or local cafes. It had reached news stations, blogs, and community pages across the country. People from different cities, even different countries, watched the quiet moment where a young man knelt before a homeless stranger and handed him a sandwich. There were no dramatic speeches, no hashtags, no shouting, yet it touched hearts deeper than loud headlines ever could. Something about the silence, the gentle way he treated the man, the respect in his eyes, felt more powerful than words. Comments began flooding in. I watched this 5 times and cried each time. I showed this to my kids so they can learn what real kindness looks like. This reminded me that humanity isn't lost. The video made its way into schools, churches, mosques, and community halls. People began organizing food drives and clothing donations. Some even started leaving sandwiches in paper bags labeled, "For anyone who needs it," in parks and bus stops. Inspired by what they had seen, even small cafes like the one in the video began keeping a shelf for pay-it-forward meals. Customers could buy an extra coffee or sandwich, and someone in need could come in and ask for it. No questions asked. Back at the original cafe, life had changed too. The cafe owner, once known for keeping to herself, now kept extra blankets and socks behind the counter just in case someone walked in cold and barefoot. The young waitress, who had once feared talking to strangers, now made it a habit to greet everyone, no matter how they looked, no matter where they came from. With a warm smile and kind words, she told her friends, "You never know who needs it the most." The stranger, now clean and living temporarily in the shelter, had started to regain strength, not just physically, but in his spirit too. Each day he swept the floors, helped in the kitchen, and even offered to carry supplies. The shelter workers noticed. "He's one of the most polite men we've had in a long time," one of them said. "Always thanks us, always tries to help." One afternoon, a volunteer named Lisa sat down beside him while he peeled potatoes. "I saw the video," she said softly. "It made me cry." The stranger smiled, a little embarrassed. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "The young man, he's the one who made the difference." Lisa shook her head. "You accepted the kindness. That matters too." Meanwhile, the young man still lived his normal life. He walked to work each day, kept his head down, and ignored the fact that his quiet act had become the center of attention online. He didn't post about it, didn't give interviews. When someone asked if it was him, he simply smiled and said, "It wasn't about me." But one day, as he stood in line for coffee, a little girl tapped him on the leg. Her mother stood behind. Her, holding a phone with the video, paused. "My daughter saw what you did," the woman said, her eyes soft. "She now packs an extra sandwich in her lunch every day." The young man knelt down and looked the girl in the eye. "That's really kind of you," he said gently. The girl beamed. "It's peanut butter and jelly," she said proudly. From that day forward, he noticed it more. People looking at him differently, but not with fame or awe, with respect, with thoughtfulness. Strangers smiled at him. Some stopped to ask questions, but most just nodded quietly. The ripple was moving outward, touching people far beyond what the young man could see, and none of it had been planned. Back at the shelter, the stranger sat with a notebook, gifted to him by another volunteer. He hadn't held a pen in years, but now he tried to write again. Not full sentences yet, but small thoughts, hopes, dreams that had once been buried under pain. He wrote, "Today someone told me I have a voice. Today, I helped someone find their missing gloves. Today I remembered who I used to be." People were starting to ask about him too. Not just the young man, but the stranger. His story, his name, his journey. Some wanted to help him find his family. Others wanted to offer small jobs, cleaning, sorting boxes, watching over store entrances. Every offer felt like a door opening, and though he stepped carefully, uncertain at times, he walked through each one with quiet bravery, and the young man, who had no idea his moment of kindness had sparked all this, just kept living his life, helping where he could, stopping when he saw someone in need, not because of cameras, not because of praise, but because it was who he was. In a world often busy, rushed, and loud, his silence had echoed louder than any voice, and through it, strangers became helpers, helpers became friends, and hope became a wave. A single act, a sandwich, a bottle of water, a soft voice saying, "You're not invisible." It had been enough to change hearts, to wake people up, to remind them what kindness truly looked like, and the ripple hadn't stopped yet. The air was warmer now. Not just because spring was approaching, but because something had changed inside the stranger's heart. The cold that once lived in his chest, the kind that came from loneliness, shame, and hunger, was melting away, slowly, day by day. At the shelter, he had started waking up before everyone else, not out of habit, but from purpose. He made coffee for the other residents, helped stack donated clothes, and sometimes stood near the entrance to greet new arrivals with a nod and a kind word. Each day felt more real now. Not just time passing, but time living. The man who used to hide his face from mirrors now walked with his shoulders straight, his beard trimmed, his clothes clean. The staff at the shelter began calling him Mr. Joseph, his real name, and the sound of it brought tears to his eyes every time. He hadn't heard anyone say his name with respect in years. One morning, a shelter coordinator pulled him aside. "We've had a call from a shop owner," she said with a smile. "They're looking for someone to help with deliveries and storekeeping part-time." Joseph blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "Me?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "They saw the video too, and they asked if you'd be willing to try." That afternoon, Joseph visited the store, a small general shop run by an older man named Mr. Khan. The shop smelled of cardboard, coffee, and cleaning products. Mr. Khan didn't ask for a resume or paperwork. He just looked Joseph in the eye and asked one question. "Are you ready to stand again?" Joseph nodded slowly. "I think I am." The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. He unpacked boxes, swept floors, organized shelves, and even helped some customers find what they needed. It felt good to be useful again, to be needed after. The first week, Mr. Khan handed him a small envelope. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours." Joseph opened it and stared at the money inside. His first paycheck in years, his hands trembled again. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from pride. Meanwhile, the young man who had started it all had no idea Joseph had gotten a job. He still hadn't seen the news or the articles or the growing wave of kindness that had swept through the city. He simply continued living the way he always had, quietly doing the right thing. But one morning, as he passed by the same cafe, he spotted a familiar figure wiping a table outside. It took him a moment to realize. Joseph. Joseph looked up and their eyes met. A long silence passed between them, and then Joseph smiled. A wide, genuine smile filled with warmth. The young man stepped forward. "You look different," he said softly. "I feel different," Joseph replied. "Thanks to you." They sat at one of the outdoor tables. The waitress brought them tea without being asked, and they talked. Not about the video, not about the fame, but about life, work, small things, big dreams. "I used to think I was invisible," Joseph said quietly. "I used to believe I would die on that sidewalk without anyone knowing my name." The young man listened, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. "You were never invisible," he said. "You were just waiting to be seen." Joseph nodded. "I think I'm ready now, ready to try again, maybe find my kids, write them a letter at least." The young man smiled. "They'll be proud when they hear your story." That night, Joseph returned to the shelter with a pen and paper. His hands shook as he began the letter, but he kept writing, each word helping him rebuild what was once broken. "Dear Emily and Thomas, I don't know if you remember me clearly. I hope you do. I'm your father. I've been lost, but I'm trying to find my way back." Days turned to weeks, and Joseph kept working, saving a little money each month, slowly building the courage to reach out to his family. His co-workers at the store began calling him Joe, a name that felt fresh but still his. Strangers still came into the store asking about the man from the video, and Joe always smiled humbly. "That was just one moment," he'd say, "but it saved me." The ripple of kindness hadn't ended. It had simply taken new forms, new hands, new voices. People began helping each other more, not for likes or cameras, but because they had been reminded. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one sandwich, one smile. And Joseph, who had once been the man everyone ignored, was now the man others came to for advice, for help, for inspiration. He still didn't have much, but he had purpose, dignity, and most of all, hope. The young man still passed by the cafe sometimes, and whenever he saw Joseph, they exchanged a nod, a quiet smile, a silent reminder of what kindness had built between them. And though the world kept rushing forward, in that little corner of the city, a new beginning had taken root. Simple, quiet, and full of heart. The city never stopped moving, traffic roared, people rushed to jobs, buses filled and emptied like tides. But in one small corner, a quiet cafe on a normal street, something had changed forever. Not because of a fire or a storm, but because of a moment that began with a sandwich and a stranger who dared to see. The young man never told anyone what he had done, not really. He never posted about it, never explained his side. When the video went viral, when people tried to find him, interview him, give him awards, he stayed silent. He believed the moment wasn't his to claim. It belonged to something bigger, something shared. He kept walking the same route to work, kept carrying the same bag, kept offering small smiles to strangers, and stopping now and then to help someone, cross a street or pick up dropped groceries. He didn't change his life, but unknowingly he had helped change many others. At the cafe, things were different now. People still came for their coffee, but they lingered longer. They asked questions. They donated more to the free meal shelf. Children brought in coins they had saved. Adults left small notes on napkins. "Be kind. You are seen. You matter." Behind the cafe, where Joseph had once slept on the cold ground, now stood a small wooden bench with a plaque that read, "Kindness begins here." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive, but it meant something. To those who knew, it was sacred. Joseph still worked at the store down the road. He still rose early, swept the floor, helped stock shelves, and told jokes that made the shopkeeper laugh. But more than that, he had become someone others looked up to. One afternoon, a boy about 17 walked into the store, clothes wrinkled, shoes old, eyes tired. Joseph recognized that look, the fear of being forgotten, of not belonging. The boy stood awkwardly by the counter, pretending to look at candy bars. Joseph walked over and asked gently, "You hungry?" The boy didn't speak, just nodded. Joseph reached into his own pocket, pulled out a small note, and placed it in the boy's hand. "Go next door," he said. "Tell them Joe sent you. They'll take care of you." The boy blinked in surprise. "Why are you helping me?" Joseph smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of pain and healing. "Because someone helped me once when I thought no one would." That night, Joseph walked home slower than usual. The stars above him were bright, the streets quiet. He thought about the young man again, still not even knowing his name. He wondered if he truly knew what he had done, because it wasn't just a sandwich. It wasn't just water. It was a door that had been opened, not just for Joseph, but for everyone who had been watching. It was a lesson, soft but unforgettable. Across the city, more stories were unfolding, small ones, quiet ones, people reaching out, neighbors helping neighbors, teachers giving extra attention to students who looked sad, strangers sitting beside someone who looked alone. In one school, a teacher played the video during a morning class and afterward asked the students, "What did you learn from this?" A little girl raised her hand and said, "That even one nice thing can change someone's life." A boy added, "That we shouldn't ignore people just because they look poor." And in the back of the room, the teacher smiled through misty eyes, knowing the message had reached where it mattered most. Joseph's letter to his children had finally reached them too. Weeks after he had mailed it one evening, as he sat reading in his small room at the shelter, a knock came on the door. He opened it to find a young woman standing there holding the letter in her hand, her eyes already full of tears. "Dad?" she whispered. Joseph froze. Time stopped. The words caught in his throat, but he managed a nod, his eyes wide. "Emily." She ran forward and wrapped her arms around him, both crying in each other's embrace. Later, sitting beside each other, she told him, "We thought you were gone. We didn't know where to find you then. Someone sent us this video." She showed him the clip, the one where he sat on the street taking a sandwich from a stranger. Joseph watched it quietly, for the first time, and by the end, he couldn't stop crying, not because of the shame, but because of the hope. His daughter held his hand tightly. "You didn't just come back to us," she said. "You became someone others needed." The young man who had started it all never learned about the reunion. He never knew that Joseph had found his daughter again, that a family had been restored because he chose to stop walking, chose to kneel, chose to care. But somewhere deep down, he might have felt it. Because sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot see. And so life went on. The city still rushed, the buses still beeped, the world still spun fast. But something had changed forever, because one morning, a young man saw a stranger, and instead of walking past, he chose to stop, and everyone around learned how powerful that one choice could be.